The metallic click of the cylinder snapping shut echoed through the cabin like a death sentence. Jake Morrison's weathered hands trembled as he slid the sixth bullet into place, each chamber now heavy with lead and heavier with purpose. Outside, the wind carved through the canyon walls, but inside, the silence pressed against him like a living thing. "She belongs to the sheriff now," old Pete had said, spitting tobacco juice into the dust. "Ain't nothing you can do about it, Morrison. Law's the law." But Jake knew there was no law in what Sheriff Briggs was doing, taking a woman against her will, hiding behind a badge that meant nothing in a town where justice died with the last honest man. The other ranchers had turned their backs, fear masking itself as wisdom. They'd rather lose one woman than face Briggs and his men. Jake set the Colt .45 on the table, its weight seeming to anchor the room. Through the cracked window he could see the path that led down to town where Sarah Chen was being held in the sheriff's office. The Chinese woman had worked his land for 3 months, never asking for anything but fair wages and a place to sleep in the barn. She'd fixed his broken fence, tended his sick cattle, and never once complained about the loneliness that seemed to seep from the very stones of this god-forsaken territory. The memory of her face when Briggs came calling burned behind his eyes. Terror, yes, but something else too, a look that said she'd expected this moment all her life, expected to be handed from one man to another like property, like livestock. Jake's reflection stared back from the gun's polished barrel. 43 years old, no wife, no children, no legacy except 200 acres of stubborn soil and cattle that barely kept him fed. What was one man's life against a system that ground people into dust? But then he remembered Sarah's hands, gentle as she'd bandaged his arm after a riding accident. Remembered her quiet dignity as she worked, never bending her back in submission, never lowering her eyes in shame. She hadn't asked for his protection, hadn't begged for rescue. She'd simply trusted that somewhere in this wasteland, one man might still remember what honor meant. Jake picked up the gun, feeling its familiar weight. The setting sun painted the walls blood red, and somewhere in town Sarah was waiting. Whether she knew it or not, whether she wanted it or not, the question wasn't whether he'd go. The question was whether he'd come back alive. Section 2, Moral Decision. Jake strapped on his gun belt, the leather worn smooth by years of honest work and harder choices. The mirror above his wash basin reflected a man he barely recognized, jaw set like granite, eyes carrying the cold fire of a decision that couldn't be undone. The smart choice was to ride north, put distance between himself and Briggs. Hell, half the county had already made that calculation. The Henderson family had packed up last month after Briggs took their youngest son on trumped-up theft charges. The boy had come back 3 days later, broken in ways that don't heal. But Jake's father had built this ranch with bleeding hands and an unbreakable will. A man stands for something, the old bastard used to say, or he falls for everything. Easy words when you're not staring down the barrel of your own mortality. He pulled his rifle from the gun rack, checking the action with practiced efficiency. 20 shots if he was careful, maybe 30 if luck stayed with him. Against Briggs and his 4 deputies, it might be enough. Might be. The floorboard creaked as he knelt to retrieve the lockbox hidden beneath. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, lay his father's war medal and a letter he'd never sent to his brother back east. Jake tucked both into his jacket pocket. If this went sideways, someone should know why he'd chosen to die. Outside, his horse stamped impatiently, sensing the tension that rolled off its master in waves. The mare had carried him through cattle drives and blizzards, through the kind of loneliness that could break a man's spirit. She'd carry him through this too, or die trying. Jake paused at the threshold, looking back at the life he was about to gamble away. The coffee still warm on the stove, the book left open on the table, the everyday pieces of a quiet existence. By dawn this might all belong to someone else. But Sarah's face appeared in his mind again, and the choice solidified like cooling iron. She'd never asked to be protected, but every person deserved the chance to choose their own fate. Even if that choice led to darkness, the ride to town would take an hour. long enough to change his mind, to find a dozen reasons to turn back, long enough to remember that heroes were usually just dead men who'd made one last stupid decision. Jake swung into the saddle, feeling the weight of the weapons and the heavier weight of his resolve. The sunset painted the canyon walls like a funeral pyre, and somewhere ahead Sheriff Briggs was about to learn that not every man in this territory could be bought, threatened or broken. Some men, when pushed far enough, just pushed back. Section 3. Danger. Arrives the main street of Cedar Falls stretched before Jake like a gauntlet, empty except for tumbleweeds and the promise of violence. Every window seemed to watch him, every shadow held the potential for an ambush. His horse's hooves rang against the hard-packed dirt, each step announcing his arrival to anyone with ears to hear. The sheriff's office squatted at the far end of town like a cancerous growth, yellow lamplight spilling from its windows. Jake could see figures moving inside. Briggs and at least 2 of his men. The odds weren't getting any better. He dismounted near the saloon, tying his mare to the hitching post with hands that remained steady despite the thunder in his chest. Through the bat-wing doors came the sound of nervous laughter and hushed conversations. Word had spread fast in a town this size. Everyone knew what was coming. Morrison. The voice cut through the evening air like a blade. Jake turned to find Deputy Collins stepping out of the alley, rifle cradled in his arms with deceptive casualness. The younger man's face was pale beneath his hat brim, fear and duty warring in his expression. "You best turn around and head home," Collins said, his voice cracking slightly. "Sheriff says you got no business here tonight." "My business is with Briggs," Jake replied, his hand resting easy near his gun. "No quarrel with you, son." Collins swallowed hard, the rifle trembling almost imperceptibly. "Can't let you pass. Sheriff's orders." Jake studied the deputy's face, seeing a reflection of his younger self, a man trying to do right in a world that made righteousness feel like suicide. "Your choice, Collins. Step aside or get buried with the rest of them." The deputy's resolve wavered, his grip shifting on the rifle. Behind him, Jake caught movement in the shadows, at least 1 more man, maybe 2. Briggs had positioned his pieces well, turning the street into a killing field. From the sheriff's office came the sound of a woman's voice, raised in anger or pain. Sarah. Whatever Briggs was doing to her, it was happening right now, while Jake stood here playing word games with a frightened boy. "Time's up," Jake said quietly. Collins raised the rifle with shaking hands. "Don't make me do this, Morrison. I got a wife, kids. Then go home to them." The standoff stretched like a wire under tension, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. The evening wind picked up, stirring dust devils in the street and carrying the scent of coming rain. Or maybe it was gunpowder Jake smelled, sharp and metallic on the air. Sarah's voice rose again from the office, this time unmistakably a cry of pain. Jake's hand moved to his gun, and Collins tensed like a spring about to break. In the shadows, other weapons shifted and clicked. The entire street held its breath, waiting for the first shot that would turn Cedar Falls into a graveyard. "Last chance, son," Jake whispered. Collins closed his eyes, finger tightening on the trigger, and the night exploded into chaos. Section 4. Human Connection. The gunshot shattered the silence, but it wasn't Collins who fired. The deputy crumpled to the ground, clutching his shoulder as Jake's bullet found its mark with surgical precision. Behind him, muzzle flashes erupted from the shadows as Briggs' other men opened fire, lead whistling through the air like angry hornets. Jake rolled behind a water trough, wood splintering above his head as bullets carved deep gouges in the planking. He counted the shots. 3 rifles, maybe 4. His return fire was measured, deliberate, each bullet precious as gold in this deadly arithmetic. "Give it up, Morrison," Briggs' voice bellowed from the sheriff's office. "You're outnumbered and outgunned." Jake said nothing, reloading with practiced efficiency while bullets whined overhead. Through the office window he caught a glimpse of Sarah's face, pressed against the glass like a trapped bird. Her eyes found his across the chaos, and in that moment something passed between them that had nothing to do with rescue or obligation. She wasn't looking at him like a savior. She was looking at him like an equal. The shooting paused as both sides reassessed their positions. Jake used the lull to move closer, darting between buildings with the fluid grace of a man who'd learned to hunt and be hunted in equal measure. Behind him, Collins groaned but didn't call out. Whatever loyalty the deputy had to Briggs, it didn't extend to getting Jake killed. "You know what she is, Morrison," Briggs shouted, his voice thick with cruel amusement. "She's yellow trash. Came here with nothing, gonna leave with nothing. You're dying for a woman who ain't even worth a bullet." Jake reached the side window of the sheriff's office, peering through the dirty glass. Sarah sat in the corner, hands bound but her spine straight as a ramrod. Blood trickled from a split lip, but her eyes burned with unbroken defiance. When she saw Jake, she didn't smile or nod. Instead she mouthed a single word, "Go." But Jake saw something else in her expression, not just courage but recognition. She understood what this moment meant, what it cost, and what it might buy. In her eyes was the same fire that had driven his father to build something lasting in this harsh land, the same stubborn refusal to bend that had kept Jake fighting when lesser men would have quit. "She's worth more than this whole damn town," Jake called back, his voice carrying across the street like a challenge. "Including you, Briggs." Sarah's eyes widened at his words, and for the first time since he'd known her, Jake saw her mask slip. Beneath the careful dignity was a woman who'd never heard herself defended, never been told she was worth fighting for. The moment stretched between them like a bridge across an impossible canyon, connecting two solitary souls who'd found something worth dying for. Then Briggs appeared in the doorway, gun drawn, and the reckoning began in earnest. Section 5. Full resolution plus epilogue. Briggs stepped into the street with the swagger of a man who'd never faced real opposition, his star catching the lamplight like fool's gold. Behind him came his remaining deputies, their weapons trained on Jake's position with nervous precision. "End of the line, Morrison," Briggs called out, his voice carrying across the dusty street. "Drop your guns and maybe I'll make it quick." Jake emerged from cover, his rifle held loose in his hands but ready. The distance between them was maybe 30 yards, close enough to see the corruption written in every line of Briggs' face, close enough to smell the whiskey on the sheriff's breath. "Let her go," Jake said quietly. "This is between you and me." Briggs laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "She's my property now, legal and binding. Got the papers to prove it." He pulled a crumpled document from his vest, waving it like a flag of conquest. "Debt collection. Her uncle owed money to some men in San Francisco. I bought the debt, and everything that comes with it. Papers don't make slavery legal," Jake replied, his finger finding the trigger. "Not even out here. Legal's whatever I say it is." The words hung in the air for a heartbeat before Jake's rifle spoke, the bullet catching Briggs' center mass and spinning him like a child's top. The sheriff's gun fired wild as he fell, the shot going high into the darkening sky. The remaining deputies hesitated, their loyalty to a dead man suddenly worth considerably less than their continued breathing. Jake worked the rifle's action, the metallic sound echoing like a death knell in the sudden silence. "Anyone else want to discuss property rights?" he asked. The deputies melted away into the shadows like morning mist, leaving Jake alone with the aftermath of his choice. He walked to the sheriff's office, his boots echoing on the wooden boards as he pushed through the door. Sarah looked up at him, her eyes reflecting a complicated mixture of gratitude and something deeper. Jake cut her bonds with his pocket knife, his hands gentle despite their calluses. "You didn't have to do this," she said softly. "Yes, I did." She studied his face for a long moment, seeing the cost written there in blood and gunpowder. "What happens now?" Jake helped her to her feet, noting how she didn't lean on him despite her obvious exhaustion. "Now you choose. Stay, go, whatever you want, your choice." Outside, the townspeople were beginning to emerge from their hiding places, drawn by curiosity and the scent of change in the air. Jake knew that by morning, word would spread to the territorial authorities. There would be questions, investigations, possibly a trial, but Sarah was alive, and she was free, and sometimes that was enough. 3 years later, a visitor to the Morrison Ranch might notice the small garden behind the main house, tended by hands that had learned to coax beauty from stubborn soil. They might see the additional room built onto the cabin, or hear the sound of quiet laughter carried on the evening wind. They might wonder about the woman who worked alongside the rancher as an equal partner, who wore no man's name but commanded respect through her own quiet strength. And if they asked about the weathered wooden cross at the edge of the property, Jake would tell them it marked the grave of a man who'd forgotten that some things were worth more than power. The sunset painted the canyon walls gold and crimson, and in the distance 2 figures stood together watching the light fade into peaceful darkness.